What's that? Who there? Whoa.
All right, guys, I've got Kevin Lee, the co-founder of Immi here. Kevin, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I've been looking forward to this for a long time. And so I want to start with your background. So you've held a variety of product roles and then transitioned to the venture side before ultimately coming back to the operational side, starting Immi. And I know it's always easier to connect the dots looking backwards, but I'd love for you to just start out just walking through your career up to this point and highlight some of the major inflection points that you feel like have been the biggest kind of impact or movers in getting you to where you are today.
For sure. I started out my career in the finance industry. I think I grew up in the Bay Area most of my life. My parents immigrated here from Taiwan and kind of drove across the country so that I could be in California and be around Silicon Valley. And so when I went to Berkeley and studied business, at the time, a lot of my classmates, this was before the tech days, so everyone was entering one of the ABCs. It was either accounting, banking, or consulting. And I had studied a little bit of finance, a little bit of some other business topics in college. And so I went the tech investment banking route to Merrill Lynch, based in Palo Alto, because it was right next to the Stanford campus. It was kind of the heart of tech at the time. And I thought that I would, without being an actual engineer or studying CS, I thought it would get me the closest to the tech industry. I think I, quickly realized after 8 months, it was nothing further than the truth, in the sense of, I felt that I was doing more of the studying and the research on my own time than, in fact, perhaps some of the people who are more senior than me in the bank. And, or in terms of just like, I was genuinely obsessed with the industry. And I think other folks perhaps were more interested in the finance, which makes sense in hindsight. So, about 8 months in, I kind of made this decision that I just wanted to get closer to the building aspect. My roommate at the time was a associate product manager over at Google, and he really taught me a lot about what a product manager was. I actually had zero exposure to that when I was at Cal, and so I ended up recruiting. I actually was really fascinated with education tech at the time, but the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, their education team. I got pretty far in the interview process and I got rejected kind of in the last minute because I just didn't have enough operating experience. And so at that point, I was pretty desperate for any kind of operating experience. And there was a mobile gaming company called Kabam, which was all former Berkeley grads. They were all friends and they started this company. And it was one of our clients at the bank. And so interviewed, I had grown up playing games and I figured, hey, this is a good way to learn product management, more from like the quantitative side. And it kind of fit into the finance role I had at the bank. And so quit, moved to San Francisco, joined Kabam during kind of its hyper growth phase. So they scaled to around 1,200 employees. I think I was employee 300. So I was pretty late already. But it was just fascinating to see how much opportunity there is when you're in a hyper growth mode. For example, 1 week they kind of sat the entire PM team down and they said, hey, we need to send 5 of you to China to basically, help open this China office. And each one of you is just going to create your own game. And we're just going to kind of Hail Mary and see which one of you makes it. And, that was kind of their way of ensuring that we would hit the H2 figures required for the board. And so I was, young and single at the time. And I just rose my hand. And literally 2 weeks later, they got us visas and we were shipped out there. Our VP at the time came from the military. And so he was very much like, kind of act now, apologize later mindset. But, there were a lot of tons of these stories and examples at Kabam where it was just so much faster moving, a lot of rapid iteration, de-risking projects, figuring out which portfolio products to launch. And I definitely learned a lot. Post that experience, I did want to get back to, what I call I have like a personal construct in life, which is just anything that accelerates kind of progress through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think, like whether that's like food, shelter, education, so on and so forth. And I want to get back to the education roots. So I interviewed for a company called Alt School, which was at the time trying to build software and hardware for education, as well as run physical schools to circumvent, trying to get their products into the public education system. And ended up getting a PM role on the parents and community team. Unfortunately, that company kind of took the opposite direction of Kabam, where they raised $100 million, and it just didn't end up working out. But it was obviously a great learning experience, and I think at that point I started thinking about, um, well, I actually did some stuff in between. I actually started another media company called Product Manager HQ. It's still running to this day. But after that, I actually started looking into the early stage venture capital industry. I didn't make like a clean jump into VC. I actually joined it was called a VC called Funders Club. And they were actually this is going to be very meta. They were a VC that went through Y Combinator as a startup and then raised from VCs themselves, from like First Round and Andreessen, a bunch of other folks. And they were basically trying to be a tech-enabled VC. So we not only had a venture team, we also had a product engineering design team, and we were building software for the venture industry while running as a venture firm ourselves. And I thought this would be kind of a great segue from my product management experience into the venture world. And then from there, I moved into more pure play venture at Pear Ventures, which is a pre-seed and seed fund led by two very legendary people. But one guy was named Pejman Nozad, who kind of escaped Iran, came here homeless, and worked at a yogurt shop, and then eventually sold rugs for like 20 years as literally a rug salesman, and then eventually became the first angel investor in like Dropbox, Lending Club, a lot of these big unicorns. And so got to learn from those from him and his partner Mar Hershenson, who really was like the polar opposite. She was a Stanford PhD who started 3 companies. And I ended up leading their food and beverage investing just because I come kind of, my grandparents are in the food industry, and I had a lot of interest in it. We can talk about this later, but that was my most recent, I guess, career jump. And then now I've started Immi. So it is all over the place. There are tying threads, but like you said, it's easier to connect the dots moving backwards than forwards.
Yeah, what a wild ride. There's so many of those threads I want to pull on and dive into. One of the first things though is it sounds like you were progressing through like the logical career stack. You start in an operational function, start going to the VC investor route, but you came back, right? You founded Immi and jumped back into the operator seat. When you thought about venture, and I'm sure training under those two amazing mentors and being able to be on the venture side was amazing. But when you reflected, what were the aspects of it that were unmet for you that kind of forced you back into this operating capacity? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I knew deep down that I had always wanted to start something, and I think in venture it is great for breadth. It is not so great for depth. I also think that for me, I don't know if this is just like a personal insecurity. I'll be honest, it probably is. I always worried that if I rose the ranks of venture without having started a company, it would feel a little bit disingenuous for me to be giving advice to other founders. Now, there's plenty of counterexamples to this. I think people have actually done data pulls where there's many successful VCs who have never been founders. And so I don't think that is, you have to be one. It was just more of a personal thing for me where I said, look, I need to go, put everything on the line and try this myself. And the funny thing is now that I'm a founder, I don't actually know if I would ever go back to VC. I don't want to say never, but I just love what I'm doing so much now that, I could see myself kind of getting addicted to just starting companies. So yeah, I think long story short is just, granted, there's probably some insecurity. 2 was, I just love creating things. Like it's in my DNA. I have like shirts that say like create every day. Doesn't matter what it is. Like I've created, like I created a book, I created this music, start during when COVID started, my fiance and I were like, man, we really miss music festivals. And so we created this like spreadsheet template, and it was like a way for anyone to host their own like Coachella from home with their friends. And we actually like ran it with a bunch of friends, and it was super successful. And so we made a template and like put it on Product Hunt and everything. So we just like creating things all the time.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the Coachella 2022 tickets came out.
Oh,
we snagged those as well.
Same here.
We'll see you there. Yeah, it's going to be awesome. So let's shift into Immi then, because I've got so many questions here, and it's such a fascinating product and approach that you guys have taken. So when you think about like the origin story, I read in a few interviews, you've been a huge Noodle fan your whole life, and that's obviously a big help in helping you understand the landscape. But walk me through how you and your co-founder Kevin thought about the market opportunity, and just as you unraveled it, like why it became just too compelling to pass up.
For sure. And I think throughout this interview, you'll probably hear me refer to him as K-Chan just because we're both named Kevin. So we've started to append our last names where I'm Kaylee and he's K-Chan just to make it easier. So K-Chan and I, we met 10 years ago at Kabam, that mobile gaming company. And we did actually, we always say the story of like we met because we were on the same team. We didn't know each other. And then when we flew to Vancouver for work trips, we actually ended up at the same like noodle joint for breakfast. Um, a friend actually didn't believe me. She was like, "Did you craft that story?" And I was like, "No, that's literally what happened. Is like we both showed up in the morning of like our first work trip, and we like had no idea who each other were, and we just like showed up at the same ramen restaurant. It was I think it was like in like a strip mall or something. We were just both eating noodles for breakfast, and that's how we bonded. It's a crazy story, and I don't think we realized until a little bit later that both of us came from food families. So my grandparents are produce farmers in Taiwan. K-Chan is actually it's much more direct. His grandmother literally ran an egg noodle hawker stall in Thailand, where he used to help out when he was a kid. And then his dad actually used to run a Thai grocery in LA, and then later ran actually like a cloud kitchen selling noodles. So that's pretty much been in his blood, for a lot of his life. And I come more from like the farmer, produce type of the food industry. So I wish I could tell you that we did a ton of category research. We eliminated the competitors. The simple truth is that we actually came together. We knew we wanted to work on a food brand, and we wanted to work on a better for you food brand because both of our families have very high rates of diabetes and high blood pressure. But when it came to picking the product, I distinctly remember he was at my place and we were like, we were sitting at a table and we were like, "What do you want to work on?" And both of us were like, "Let's just work on noodles." Like that's what we both love. And we hate this feeling where like you have to feel guilty when you eat noodles because they're so carb heavy, and like you drink the ramen broth and it's always like, "Oh, I feel like crap." And so we said, well, let's work on a low carb noodle because that's not something you see in the marketplace. Low carb is important to us because of the family history with diabetes. And um, that's quite literally how the brainstorming started. I think it wasn't until a little bit later in hindsight where we started examining the instant ramen industry and we were like, oh my God, like it's a $46 billion industry. There's effectively three conglomerates. They're all Asian conglomerates who own 91% of the market share in the US. And this is like a sleepy category, right? These conglomerates have not changed their formulas in the past 50 to 60 years since instant ramen was invented. And so we kind of looked at that and we said, well, if we can reinvent instant ramen, we can make it low carb, high protein, entirely plant based. And I'm happy to talk through how we even came across these value props and how we demand tested this idea. But that was kind of the starting point for our journey with Immi.
Yeah, that was the next kind of place I wanted to go, was the product development. And so a few questions within this. The first is, as you guys experimented, because I read the story on your site, you just started cooking noodles and tweaking the recipe and the formulation. As you started that process, how much of that was informed by your grandparents and parents' influence in terms of knowledge that maybe the rest of the market doesn't have, versus you guys just started doing research on your own and throwing ingredients together and trying to actually make something that worked? Talk through that process a little bit.
Is the latter. I think the family history is more so interesting in that, it's, I always say like, it's hard to run from like your own blood in a way. Like you can reinvent yourself. You can do a lot of things. I think, there's something funny about like genetics and whatnot. I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to go through any of this, but we tell that story because it's like our grandparents were in this industry. Our parents literally immigrated to the US so that we could not be in the food industry. And for some freaking reason, we both
couldn't get away from
it. Couldn't get away from it. But we did not really have any pre-existing knowledge. Keichin and I are not food scientists. We're not chefs. We really approached this entire process from the ground up. All we had was 10 years of collective experience working in the tech industry, which, some of it is transferable. Most of it is not. But this term gets thrown around a lot. But like from a first principles standpoint, it was really us like first studying, okay, well, how do people make noodles today? A lot of that was just YouTube, reading research reports. we would translate research reports that were in like Chinese or Japanese, and we would just kind of look at how other people have done it. Um, and then, we would start hand rolling. And then at a certain point, we would go talk to other noodle experts. We would literally cold call or cold email, and then they would give us some feedback. And then from there, I think we made like 100 iterations. We got stuck. And then we reached out to a food science PhD and a chef who both, eventually came on board as advisors. But really, again, it's in the food industry, it's no different than in the tech industry in the sense that you can't just go to a general food scientist and expect them to know how to create the food you're trying to make. Like I liken it to, you can't go to like a C++ engineer and expect them to know, I don't know, Python or something, right? Like they're very specialized in certain ways. And so food science PhD and chef really were there to help improve the process by which we were iterating and formulating. And so I've spoken about this on several other podcasts, but um, one of my favorite books is a book called The Goal, which is it's really like an industrial engineering book around like it's like a guy has a factory and he has to improve the output, and so like certain levers there are to iterate on to improve the output. And so for us, the food science PhD and chef, what they helped with was they improved our throughput. So they looked at the process by which we were creating new formulations every day, and they said, "Look, you guys could be like 4 times faster than you are simply by doing steps 1, 2, and 3." And they also expanded the knowledge of of ingredients that we were exposed to. So we had a limited knowledge based on our own research, and the chef was like, "Did you know about this protein, this thing, and this thing?" And so it was kind of those two huge levers which got us to version 200 and made us comfortable with quitting our jobs, frankly, and moving forward with a manufacturer.
Yeah, I love that story. So when you think about the kind of values testing, as you mentioned, right? So you hear a lot in the market, better for you. What does that mean? Typically it could be keto, high protein, low carb, low sodium, plant-based. Like those are all buzzy right now, and for good reason, right? They make people feel better and they're definitely cleaner. And I think a lot of those are core to the way you message the product today. But are there others, and how did you test which ones you wanted to anchor to? Because a lot of it is messaging, of course, but you do want the product to be great for people when they eat it. So just talk through that process as well.
For sure. I think so in the food industry, I think it is fairly important to ensure that there is some sort of macro trend that your product, I guess, accounts for. And, for us, we weren't, I think in the early days, we had a handful of ideas around what value props we wanted our low carb ramen to have. So, we had even thrown around, for example, like gluten-free. Is that going to be important? Um, what we ended up doing was the first round of testing we did at all was simply just throwing up an unbalanced landing page, threw down a couple of value props. We had a friend design a rendering for $20. And we had a widget called Celery that allowed us to collect pre-orders. I think Celery has since been sunsetted, unfortunately. And Kei-Chen he was a lead PM at Facebook. And so he had some ad credits left over, and we just used them and ran some ads, really just trying to see, hey, are people interested in this product at all? Are they literally going through the pre-order process, putting down their credit card and getting charged for it? And then what we would do is we would email these people, refund them, and we would also ask them, hey, just curious, why did you buy the product? And we learned a lot about the different value props they were interested in, because people would say, oh, I really care about the high protein, or I really cared about the low carb thing that you listed on the website. So that was kind of the qualitative way of gathering some of this data. We took a second quantitative approach, which was we ran a series of ad tests where the first ad test was just to test which audiences were interested in this product. So, are you an audience on Facebook that's interested in physical fitness? Because maybe it's, I'm not sure, like maybe it's for bodybuilders or something. Or is it someone who's interested in like yoga? Maybe it's like a bi-coastal region mom who's maybe of higher income. And so we did different audience testing. And then of the winning audience, we did a second ad test, which was around value props. So we took the winning audiences, and then we started, in each ad, we had a different value prop. And we really were just looking for the lowest cost per lead, which was our proxy of saying, okay, that's, if it's the lowest cost per lead, that means the person is the most interested for this value prop. And that's actually how we were able to prioritize, okay, low carb, high protein, plant-based were the top 3 contenders. everything else, the higher fiber, which we ended up adding because it's just important to us. We think it's an important attribute that most people will slowly grow to understand. Gluten-free was not at all like it
It's
was
really
such a
surprising.
yeah, exactly. And we were surprised too. We were like, oh, we thought more people would ask about this. But I think it does also match the fact that something like less than 5% of the US population is actually considered gluten free. I don't know how fast that's growing. So I do think we took a little bit more of like this data driven approach to validate, which value props to focus R&D on before we even built the product.
Yeah, and that feels like it feels like the way you're supposed to do it. I feel like a lot of people just like put their thumb in the air and say like, "Oh, this is the right directional trend," but it sounds like you had a hypothesis, put your foot in the ground, then also validated it with quantitative analysis and those ads. So
Hmm.
that makes a ton of sense. When you think about like the roadmap of Immi broadly, and I'm kind of extrapolating based on what I've read about it and consumed, but it feels like you're positioning this as a broader brand to disrupt Asian American food broadly, right? And you're starting with ramen. It's obviously a massive category, and you could probably build just a business on that alone.
Yeah.
When you think about, and I know you've launched in the last year plus or so, so it's
5
still
months.
early. 5 months, yeah. I was gonna say, I thought it was even less than a year.
Yeah.
I was hedging there, so good call out. So when you think about like building your team to work on other verticals as well, like talk about that because there's probably a laundry list of things that you could have an army of people doing just for the ramen side. And so do
For
you have
sure.
a team on R&D building out other products, experimenting, or is that more of like future vision? Just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's a great observation. We definitely are trying to build a platform for better for you Asian American food in general. And the way we think about product development has not been brand extensions, so new products. Um, the way we think about that has actually been more founder driven, which is, hey, what were the childhood foods that we grew up with that probably have some nostalgic and very like fun appeal. For example, like instant ramen is very nostalgic, it is very fun because you can add your own toppings. And that's pretty much what's been guiding more of like product development, product expansion. You're absolutely correct that instant ramen alone, it's just such a big category. We could live within this for a very long time. We've only recently probably started thinking about what a brand extension would look like outside of instant ramen. But I think for us, we don't want to distract too much, especially in the first like 2 years of the business. Too many brands we've seen focus too much on the platform. They try to expand beyond the hero product, and then it kind of just falls flat. That's something we want to be very thoughtful of, where we want to ensure that, hey, right now we have a version one of the product. It's not quite there from our standards. We're always very honest with people about that. We have a version two coming out actually in August, which way better, much closer parity to instant ramen. We consider this version two to be more of like our true real launch with Immi. And then once we're in market with version two, and we're obviously going to keep iterating on that, when we feel great about that, then we will be able to then move into a broader another food category. And I think this is kind of the way that most food conglomerates do operate. I was speaking to someone who used to be an early food scientist at Kraft Heinz, and for them, they have like very strict benchmarks. So they'll say, "Hey, each new food product we launch needs to hit, like $250 million in annual revenue potential, before we're willing to launch it and then move to something else. If it doesn't hit that, we kill it." And so it's very reminiscent to the way that Kitchen and I used to operate back in the mobile gaming industry, where we had beta metrics we had to launch, we had to hit. And if it didn't hit those beta metrics and there wasn't enough signal, then that product would get killed and we'd move on to the next product. So long story short is we don't have a team dedicated to new categories just yet. Really, it's me and K-Chan. K-Chan actually takes the brunt of all the R&D. He leads product ops and finance, and he was actually the one that did most of the heavy R&D lift alongside some of our external advisors.
Yeah, he's full of ramen. He's been testing since
He
you guys
has.
started. Yeah, I love that. And I think that's right. So it feels like a lot of people like you said, launch a hero product and then they fragment their attention in a really negative way. They can't compound their focus, but
Mhm.
it actually feels like the right way is just double down on the winner and go as hard as you can on it until you start to see a plateau.
For sure.
Um, I feel like what I love about what you guys are doing is you're taking this a data-driven, tech-infused process and building in CPG or food, which feels like a logical jump. But I bet there's so many founders in food that don't have that tech background that are not taking that quantitative approach. And so one of the questions I love to ask on the show is, you know, and people love hearing this as well, for better or for worse, is like things that you've tried that haven't worked. But it feels like when you use a data-driven approach, you can take small bets, test, and then double down on what works. So when you hear that question, and I'm sure it's been a roller coaster since you've launched, what are some of the things that come to mind when you think about, small failures or things that haven't worked, and how have you reacted?
Interesting. Small failures. Let's see. Well, I think in in the R&D phase, we actually initially wanted to go international for manufacturing. Um, Unfortunately, this was actually so it feels strange because this was right before COVID hit, and so in hindsight, it probably was the best decision at the time to bring manufacturing back domestically. Um, the reason I call it a failure is because for us, the best instant ramen manufacturers are international. Instant ramen originated in Asia, and so there aren't any, if actually there aren't supposed to be any instant ramen manufacturers in the US apart from Asian conglomerates who open their own facilities here. So because of COVID, we did have to do domestic manufacturing. It did work out to get our V1 product out, but we knew that V1 was not up to par with what our standards were. Because we've grown up eating the good stuff. We know what it takes to reach like parity in terms of taste and texture. And I think we just knew that V1 was not there, but we had to launch because we wanted to get to market. We wanted to learn and iterate. And then, in parallel, set up international manufacturing. So I was personally still consider it a failure because I know that we could have launched V1 with a much better product. But in many ways, I guess hopefully it wasn't a failure in that we did learn so much in the process in the past 5 months. Um, I think, well, from like a marketing standpoint, we actually bought the at ramen handle on TikTok, and we actually grew it to like 80,000 followers, over a million likes, and I forgot, maybe like 6 to 8 months ago, TikTok actually banned the account. Apparently, we bought it from a friend of a friend, and apparently the friend of a friend had purchased, sorry, not purchased. They had squatted on something like 500 handles when TikTok first launched, and he basically created like a bunch of 4 and 5 letter handles and just like held onto them for years and then was like slowly selling them to people, which I don't think is like illegal in any way. I think he was just smart for like being the first person to like want to do that. But TikTok said like, oh, that's violating community guidelines, and so they basically banned his account. And then anyone who owned one of his accounts, they like suspended those accounts like forever. And so we lost that account, which was a huge bummer. And I do consider it a failure because we invested a lot of time and capital to growing that account. And that's not to say that we can't redo it off of our own branded account, but I just wish that they hadn't been so strict about that.
Yeah, that's super tough. One of the other questions to play on the kind of distribution and manufacturing piece. So right now, I know Immi is D2C first, right? You're selling via the
Correct.
website, and it's sold direct to consumer. But I feel like ramen, at least the way instant ramen, the way I think about it, is not necessarily an impulse buy, but when you go to the store, you see it on the end cap, so you see, right? That's when
Yeah.
you throw it in the cart. So I imagine you guys are thinking about how to get distribution in store to create kind of omni-channel. How is that process going? Is it harder or easier than you thought to sell in? It requires obviously a bigger sales force, et cetera. So talk through that a little bit as well.
Yeah, we actually haven't touched retail at all. I think the old way for food and beverage brands to grow, was you got to hit the retail doors, literally door by door. You got to do like trade shows. You have to set up demos in store. For us, I think the thing we learned from a lot of our investors and advisors, um, some of the fastest growing food and beverage brands is, you these days you build a brand online first via D2C. You understand exactly where your customers live so that when buyers approach you, you can be a lot more intelligent with the conversations. You can turn down buyers from certain geos where your product has no brand, no visibility. Because if they stock them in store and people don't know what your brand is, they don't know what your product is, they're not going to buy it. You're going to have very low velocity of selling, and you're just not, they'll probably even pull you from shelf. So for us, we knew that, especially with our V2 product coming out, we wanted at least some time in market for people to recognize and understand, like, hey, this is a good product. I like this, but I don't want to have to keep going to your online store because I'm not going to remember to do that. So then they're just going to go in store and ask the buyers on our behalf. And then hopefully the buyers will be like, why does everyone keep asking about Immi ramen? Maybe we should reach out to those guys. And hopefully, that'll give us better negotiating leverage as well, where we don't have to negotiate, we can negotiate down some of the trade spend, maybe reduce some of the slotting fees, things like that. So I look forward to retail. I really do. I think it will be a big mover for the business, but we want to be very thoughtful in our approach.
Yeah, totally. A few questions broader at the kind of food and bev level. So the first one are just around trends. So I know, as you mentioned, you led food and bev at Pear, and obviously you're living and breathing the food world now. What are some of the interesting trends in the food and bev space that you're seeing emerge or predict will be a huge factor over the next 3 to 5 years that people might not expect?
Oh man, that's an interesting question. Um, I would say gut and digestive health is something we're seeing a lot more of. Like a lot of brands like fiber, prebiotics. I don't think these were sexy things that people cared about, right? Because they're not physical appearance oriented. Uh, Things like low carb, low calorie are always going to be in vogue. Like those are not fads; those are macro trends. Because at the end of the day, I do think most people they care about losing weight as much as that's not maybe like the best thing or whatever. It's just like that is a thing, frankly, because people are superficial in many certain ways. Sorry to be so negative, but I think when it comes to again like gut health, digestive health, which is more internal, people are getting smarter. People are more well educated on food. One of our we're close to the team at Olipop, which is a prebiotic soda replacement, frankly, and they just did their first national TV ad, basically like positioning themselves against the big soda companies and really just use a ton of liquid fiber, digestive fibers in their formulation. And it's interesting to see the amount of traction they've gotten in. Of course, they position themselves probably more as a healthy soda, but I just think that over the next few years, we're going to see a lot more emphasis on fiber. I don't think that, well, okay, so, I think the paleo community, maybe 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, it was growing quickly, but then it kind of got overshadowed where like people then started focusing on keto. Um, and I think keto has had its heyday and obviously it's declined a lot since the peak. And I have definitely heard, people are kind of regressing back to like the caveman style of like, hey, whole food ingredients, simplify as much as you can. Obviously, Immi is not a paleo product. We have wheat, but truthfully, like as an Asian person who grew up, as in an Asian family, Asia's never had issues with gluten in the past and things like that. So it wasn't really a primary focus for us. But I definitely agree that reducing processed foods is probably one of the most important things you can do. I just don't know if that's like a recent trend, but it's just funny how when you look at the cycle of foods where it's like protein bars, it used to be Quest bar, which was like, okay, Quest bar, it's going to be a certain macro, it's going to be like low net carbs. But then if you look at the ingredient label, it was like insane. And then it kind of like turned into the RX bar, right, which was like clean label. And I think you can kind of see that happening across different categories where, first it was like all about macronutritional profile, and then it was about like wholesome reduced ingredients. So that I don't think that trend's going to go away.
Yeah, that feels like where we're at. It also feels like the percent of the overall population that cares about their food one way or another, not necessarily which bucket they're in, but the fact that they care about being in a bucket, that percent as a whole is going up, which means there's a lot more room for discovery in some of these smaller areas.
I would say the interesting thing is like people you're always seen as the crazy one when you and your social group of friends starts to eat healthier, right? People are like criticizing you. They'd be like, "What do you mean you're going low carb?" Or like, "Well, like what keto? Like, why would you do that?" And you feel ostracized. But when you start eating healthier, you can't. It's almost like you can't unsee it. It's like from that point on, you're never going back. You don't have to be extreme, but you probably will start changing your eating habits. And when you loop a friend in and they see the same thing, they will also change all their behaviors. And so the direction is like it's all one way, right? People are getting healthier or they're getting smarter, and hopefully healthy food costs will also go down over time because I do think it's restrictive from a economic standpoint. But I do think that that will happen over time. And if that's true, then it's like why would you want to die faster if you have the option not to? So I think the market will keep expanding in that regard.
Totally. A different question at the same lens or same altitude on the category. So, and this might spring you, without thinking about it. So we can definitely pass if needed. But what other food categories are out there that you feel like haven't yet been disrupted with a healthy alternative that are, like you said, sleepy? Like ramen, instant ramen was kind of a sleepy category, and you guys came in and disrupted. Are there any others that come to mind that you feel like a healthy alternative is bubbling up?
I'm fascinated. So there's a lot of companies springing up that are tackling the most, like, they could sound like the most niche possible. A lot of these are actually frozen foods that I'm thinking about right now. There's like a Brazilian bread company that it's like, I had never had Brazilian bread until a Brazilian friend of mine, he invited me over for dinner. I tried it. I was like, holy crap, this is so good. And then I started seeing them in the frozen section of like Whole Foods. And um, there's a lot of these types of foods where another one came out recently called Snow Days, which takes like the pizza roll. I think it was Tostino. I don't remember who makes the old pizza rolls. And they make like a healthier, like grain free, like every type of seed oil free, like pizza rolls. And it's a absolutely amazing product. I love it. And I think there's just like, I don't know if that would be considered a sleepy category, but it's definitely not something that I consider like a sexy food that all of a sudden is like, wait a second, like, yeah, I could totally see myself buying this for like, every time I'm like headed out to like Tahoe or something, hang out with friends or, just like a random Friday night when I don't want to order out. So, um, yeah, I wish I had a better answer, but I would say it's a lot of these like one-off things that I just wouldn't imagine. Like yogurt is a big category, but like pizza rolls, interesting. Like I couldn't imagine that could be reinvented.
Yeah, that's when I saw you guys on Twitter released Immi, I was like, God, that makes so much sense. And like ramen is such an obvious one. People, you go to like I live in New York, you go to great
Mm,
ramen shops. You don't think twice about like, oh, is there a healthy alternative? Because it feels like it's made the right way. But
yeah,
no, very few people that are our age are eating Maruchan anymore because
exactly.
you
It's
just know it's not
terrible.
good for you. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's brilliant. Yeah. If you come up with any others throughout the episode, feel free to sprinkle them in because I'm fascinated by that.
definitely.
All right, one more question in this section is kind of the Startup Manifesto, which we ask to every guest. So, if you had to write a Startup Manifesto with 5 of the most important key lessons or pitfalls to avoid when starting out building a company, what would they be?
Yeah, I think let's see, 5 key lessons. The first is I don't know. I think I've always appreciated when people have had like or I've appreciated my co-founder a lot. I can't imagine doing this journey solo. And so for anyone listening, like if you are planning to find a co-founder, just find someone you trust who has complementary skill sets. And I know that's such a cliche thing to say, but like this trust piece, I've watched, in my time in venture and even just like in my social group, watching other friends go through entrepreneurship. When you find someone you trust, there's a lot of unspoken things. You don't there's like it's almost like you don't have to worry about the ego piece where like when you start a company together, there's like little ego things like, oh, who should be the CEO? Like, what should the equity split be? Oh, wait, he like criticized me. Does that mean he's attacking me personally? A lot of that stuff kind of just disappears when you find someone you trust. It's just unspoken. And I think that saves a lot of time, a lot of anguish, a lot of worry that, energy that could be better spent towards running the business. The other thing is like it's natural to want to find a friend who's just like you. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to hang out with you 24/7. It's going to be so fun. But gosh, like if you don't have complementary skill sets, it's not going to be that great. Fortunately, Keishan and I are very opposite in many, many ways. And I think we got lucky, frankly, is the truth. But in hindsight, it's like find someone who you get along with, but maybe you're just like kind of annoyed at their working style because they're so different than you. That's what me and Keishan were. We worked on the same team. I would not say we got along from like a working standpoint, but socially we like loved each other and we hung out all the time. But he was just a very different working style, and that ended up being a beautiful part of our current co-working relationship. The second thing is, I would say when you start a company, uh, choose a mission and a vision that really aligns with your own personal values and goals in life. Uh, I've always stated this very like broad I mean, it's not a social contract. It's like a personal construct of how I view the world, which is like, I want to accelerate people's progress through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That could mean many things, right? But for me, it's like, okay, that means that fundamentally, if I work on like the lowest rungs of that ladder and I take care of these like scarcity needs, then generally I'll be very happy because I feel like I'm actually doing something useful and productive in society, and like I'm helping people progress towards, self-actualization. And so whether that's education tech or like democratizing like financial freedom, but right now it's very much like food, health, and nutrition. And so I feel personally fulfilled every single day. And like there were other reasons why I started this company, like my own family's health, but like that broader mission makes me like want to keep going in like the shit storms, all the terrible moments is like I just feel very fulfilled. And I think it's really hard to fake that enjoyment when you're working on this like day to day for like 5 to 10 years. So give yourself that like greater purpose, and I think it's just gonna make you feel, it'll align a lot of things. The third thing is I would say like never stop talking to your customers. For us, even when we were doing like that demand testing, that was all getting in front of customers, emailing them, asking them why they wanted to buy the product. When we were doing R&D for like a year, we built a beta community on Facebook up to like, and we built it to 3,500 people at the time. And these were people that we were talking to. We were scheduling user interviews with. We were like constantly polling them, asking them for feedback. It's just so important to ensure that you're building the right thing, because you just get in your own head all the time as a founder, and you make these like really stupid decisions because it's you or you and your co-founder, and you think that everyone else thinks the same way you do, and no one generally does. So uh, I'd say the fourth thing is like in an early stage startup, like veer towards speed as a habit, especially when it comes to like making and executing upon decisions. That's really the only advantage you have against big companies at the early days. Uh, and so, it's kind of like the move fast and break things. Like you can get away with that as a young company, you can't later on. And so, um, what is it? Good is the enemy of great or something. I forgot what that term is, but basically, like, well, we say like if you have, was it? It's like the Reid Hoffman quote of, um, if you aren't embarrassed by the first version of your product, then you've like launched too late, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
you waited too long. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how we feel all the time. And so, and then the fifth thing I would say is like like celebrate your milestones, because it's so easy to get into this cycle of like, oh, I got to think about the next thing. So like raise a round of financing, launch a product, great. What's the next thing? I got to think about the next thing. And I myself am a common like perpetrator of this, where I would always be like, okay, great, let's just move on. Like there's nothing to celebrate here. Like but I think, I have this like quote on my wall that's just like, remember when you wanted what you have now. And then I have this second quote that's, you can't feel it then if you can't feel it now. So it's kind of like this happiness thing where, you got to make sure you're celebrating these milestones. If you don't celebrate it now, you're definitely not going to celebrate it at a later point when you actually are successful. And so that one's a little bit more of my like softy one, but it's important.
Yeah, no, that last one's so key though. It's so hard for high achievers to like ramp down for 30 seconds and just like appreciate what's going on, because the reason you got there is because you were so determined, focused, had so much grit. But that's such a great point. All right, thank you for that list. That's an amazing one. We'll clip that. All right, so I want to shift to a couple questions around your investing. So I'm fascinated by founder investors or investor founders, and either people who have had a previous life as an investor like you have, or they're just a founder, serial founder, and they're an angel investor on the side. I had Jeremy on. He's the one who recommended you, and he,
Yeah.
he does this as well. So I talked to him about this. And so, I'd love for you to just walk me through, thesis is such an overused word, but your thesis as an investor and what you look for when you're vetting deals on the angel side.
Definitely. Jeremy is a much more incredible investor than I am, by the way. So he will have a lot more advice here. For me, the first thing is generally like it goes back to again like that personal construct I created. For anyone listening, like a couple of years ago, I kind of had this like existential crisis. Maybe like more than 5 years ago, where I'm someone who always has to look for like purpose. It's a weird thing. In fact, it could be like, I remember I was watching like Queen's Gambit on Netflix, and they said that the main character has like some sort of like, there's like term for it. It's like, it could be like borderline schizophrenic or something, where it's like she's always looking for patterns and always looking for purpose in certain things. And I sometimes worry like that's me where I'm looking too much. But I generally need to have like a construct to feel like I'm moving in the right direction. And that's where I like sat down and I was like, okay, this like Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing is really important to me. How do I turn that into the way I guide my life structure? And so first and foremost, like I would say like 99% of the investments I make, I have to feel like they are, like actually moving people forward in that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And like because it's such a broad umbrella, it does give me a lot of creative freedom. But for example, like there's a company I invested in called North Star, which is trying to bring like financial advisors to everyone, the 99%. And so they'll like pair you with your own personal advisor who walks you through. And it's something that was only historically restricted for like the top 1%. So that's kind of like a first filter for me. Like Sweet Green as well. Like obviously like healthy salads, like better eating for everyone. Like SpaceX, like I did that as like a late stage investment, but hey, they're like actually furthering humanity in some way. So that's like my overarching thesis, not really a thesis, but like, okay, it's advancing human good in some way. What I've learned over the years is the more diligence I have to do on a founder, the less likely it is that that investment is going to succeed for me. I don't know why it just happens. Is like it's usually like whenever there's a founder friend where I'm like, okay, I've known you for like 5 years, and like man, like you just crush it in everything you do. I don't really care what you build. In fact, I actually think your idea is kind of terrible. Like if I didn't want to be blunt, but I'm just going to invest in you anyways. And I have a handful of these examples where um, like The Hustle was a media company where I had known Sam Parr for like many years. I just watched him like hustle his way and do everything. And when he asked me if I wanted to invest, I literally had an email that said like, shut up and take my money. I didn't even like want the pitch. Another guy, Ruben Harris, I had known him from my old school days, and he started a company called Career Karma. And he was like, hey, do you want to invest? And I also sent him the gift, like, shut up and take my money. I did not take a pitch meeting. I didn't even really look at the pitch deck. And both those companies are doing really, really well. And comparing that to like another founder, I'm not going to mention it, like someone where I didn't understand their industry, but I started doing a lot of diligence. And then I was like, oh man, this industry and this idea is really great. I don't know you as well, but I'm going to take a gamble here. Like those have not really panned out. So I recognize there's a lot that goes into that. It's not easy for a listener to then just like find their smart friends and invest in them. I think there's a lot of pattern matching that has happened over the years. Especially as a venture investor, where I saw like 1,000 data points, if not more. That obviously fine tunes my standard of what is a high quality like founder. In terms of like execution capabilities, general IQ, things like that, growth mindset. But that is how I invest. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So one of the other questions on that sometimes tough to answer is the missed deals. And by missed ones, I mean the ones that you could have invested in early, but passed either because you either did so much diligence that you said, no, it's not going to work, and you like psyched yourself out of it, or you missed it for one reason or another. Did any come to mind for you that are, top of mind?
Yeah, I mean, like for like Rome Research was one where I was like really excited. I had, spoken to the founder, and that one doesn't really count though because I think he ended up just like ghosting me. That's my fault. Like I should have fought harder for that. I'm trying to think of other like, This is why I need to keep an anti-portfolio. I should have a better answer for you here, but I really can't think of any. I try not to have too much regret with these. And like angel investing has always been like a fun thing. I'm not a professional angel investor. So if so, I would have kept an anti-portfolio. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. All right, we've got a few more questions we can shift to the brainstorm for you. So the first one is just around community building. So I think so you obviously mentioned this before. You founded Product Manager HQ, which honestly became one of the largest communities and weekly newsletters for product managers, which is amazing. I think building great communities is going to be an even more core part of brand building over the next decade. I think people who are bullish on figuring out the intricacies of their community and serving their community, it's kind of like user research elevated to the next level. I think that's going to be huge. And so what I wanted to get from you is, some thoughts around when building a community, what are the most important things to get right from your experience? And how do you advise any of your friends or companies that you invest in on how to build better communities?
Hmm. So the first thing is, I would say you need to greatly consider the medium in which you run the community. So whether that's Facebook group, Slack, Circle.so. For the product management community, it's like a very user research mindset of, okay, well, if you're a PM, are you really going to at your work be going onto a Facebook group in the middle of the day? Um, you know, for A is like it's another channel you have to like go to. B is like, is that going to look great if you're on Facebook all day? So when I was thinking about the community there, I thought, well, hey, their engineering teams, design teams, everyone's already running in Slack. This was back in 2013. So Slack was still relatively new, but it was growing quickly. And I figured, hey, well, it's as simple as them doing like command two to shift to another community within Slack. So I think the medium is really important because if you have a low barrier to entry for people to communicate, consume, and participate in the community, it just leads to a faster engagement cycle. And that's what really like speeds up growth of that community. Two is I think your onboarding mechanisms need to be pretty well thought through. And what I mean there is, like no one wants to be thrust into like 1,000 member community with no guidance, no accountability buddy, no onboarding instructions. It's a very overwhelming experience, especially for introverts who, like, to them, that's like going to a conference and then having to like strike conversation with a stranger. It's very scary. And so, for in the early days, we built like a pretty nice onboarding flow that welcomed people. Um, I think even when it was small enough, I would actually like DM each person and like try to match make them with another person in the community so that they could get to know each other and have a friend that they could then approach conversations with. Um, I think the other thing about a community is you as a community owner have to figure out how to relinquish control as soon as possible. It is very tempting to think, oh, I started this community, I have to be in control of everything, I have to moderate everything. uh, Nothing can be further than the truth. Like your community needs to be able to self-sustain without you. And so whether that means quickly identifying who are the major contributors, who can I make them moderators? Can I give them more ownership? Can I let them own different channels? Um, yeah, if you can do that, that it's just like running an organization or a company. It's really no different. You offload those responsibilities and you trust that they'll take care of them. Um, and then, yeah, I think like this open transparency thing is really important. Like I made the mistake in the early days where I like switched from a free to a paid community and I didn't explain the rationale. I just did it. And people in the community were like, what the hell? Like, why did you do that? And it was like, in my defense, I was like, oh, well, I noticed the retention was terrible when it was free because people would join, they would like leave immediately. And I was like, oh, I thought that if there was a little bit of buy in, people would be more invested. But this was not something I communicated openly to the community. And so they thought I was this money grabbing person. And so you just have to, it's scary because you're like, oh my God, there could be a herd mentality. But I've generally noticed that this like over transparency with the community is really important. Like it's made up of all these individual members, so they should know what's going on behind the scenes. Yeah, I think there's probably a lot more. A friend of mine, Nick DeWild, wrote an amazing post about running great communities. I think it's since been adopted by the On Deck community. Eric Thornburg, one of our investors, is amazing at building community. He probably has a lot of thoughts here. But if you check out Nick DeWild on Medium, I believe he has a great post around running amazing communities and the feedback loops you need.
We'll link that up. Yeah, I follow Greg Eisenberg as well. He's
Awesome.
all
He's
over
also
communities.
great.
Yeah, he runs that fund. Those are awesome points. Thank you for that. All right, one more question. We'll get to the brainstorm. So this one's a little bit more abstract, but effectively talking about this startup edge. So it feels like you have a great network. You've interacted with so many successful founders, either friends, founders that you invested in directly or through Pair. And I'm curious from your perspective, what are the things that give the best entrepreneurs this edge? Because as I was reflecting on this, it can't just be that they outwork everybody. There's still only 24 hours in the day, right? So there's got to be some of these key factors. From your perspective, what are they?
Yeah, I think, like everyone throws out grit, but I actually have come to realize I think it's actually like self awareness. And what that means is um, a lot of founders, They become founders because they're probably like, I would say they're probably like stubborn in certain ways, right? They were like, oh, I don't like following rules, or like, I believe something that no one else does. And even if you think I'm crazy, like I'm going to go do it. But I think that self-awareness piece is probably more from like a personal development standpoint, where you have to be aware of your flaws. And you also have to be aware of your strengths. Your strengths are where you want to be doubling down so that you can outsource or delegate. And your weaknesses are like, they are fundamental like flaws that you should probably think about how to at least like get to a baseline. I don't think you need to overcompensate for your weaknesses, because strengths and weaknesses are double-edged swords. Like if you improve at one, you might like worsen the other, so on and so forth. But that self-awareness piece, it's like, you can fix this. Like you can, if you can, don't think of it as a cost, think of it as an investment. But if you get executive coaching, for example, like an executive coach is there to help you label a lot of the like insecurities or like these negative stories that you tell yourself that are probably holding you back from reaching the next level. Like, I realized early on that I'm super critical of myself, and I will literally shit on myself all day, every day. Where it becomes so unhealthy that like, for example, like I'm so insecure about certain customer complaints about our product taste that I start to think that our product is horrible. The moment I think our product is horrible, then I, who am responsible for marketing, I grow embarrassed of wanting to market our product, and therefore like our sales drops. Well, that is a direct business metric impact as a result of my own insecurity, which in fact, it's like your loudest customers are generally like, they can be a small population. So it's just something in my own head. And if I wasn't self-aware or had a third party help me become self-aware of that, that could be a recurring issue that will compound into like immeasurable ways, which leads to the demise of the company. So, uh, you either have to practice these like self-awareness mechanisms yourself to quickly identify, okay, what are my flaws? Like, how can I fix them? Or you have to get help, whether through friends who are willing to be honest and who can tell you like what your strengths and weaknesses are, or through like a coach who is objectively able to identify these issues.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think I have this thesis that, well, I hate the word thesis. I just throw it in there. I have this idea that I feel like everybody should have, fractional coaching in all aspects of their life, right? We think about this. It's normal in society to have a therapist, which is kind of like an emotional coach, right? And an executive coach for business approach. But fitness, mindset, holistic medicine, like just all of these areas, I feel like there should be a better access. One of the companies we had on here called Future, we had Rishi, the founder, on here, and they're doing this right for fitness. But
Right.
I think there's just so much room for that. And I think what coaching does is it augments and supports a lack of self-awareness in certain areas, right? It's an
Totally.
outside perspective that trusts you. Yeah, awesome. So let's shift to the brainstorm. And I love this part of the show. If you've ever listened to My First Million, this is inspired by that by
Nice.
Sam Parr and John Pori. So basically, what's one idea that if Immi was gone tomorrow and you couldn't just rebuild in this space, what's one idea that excites you enough to potentially explore it for starting a new business?
Ooh, so I'm not allowed to do it in food and beverage.
You can do it in food and beverage, but just
Okay.
not like a
Got
instant ramen
it.
replacement. I've got all the knowledge.
Um, Gosh. Well, so I feel like it is kind of similar, because Immi at the end of the day will probably, most food brands become like holding companies in certain ways because they have like multiple products in their portfolio. Um, but I have noticed that there are a few examples. So general concept is like a holding company for better for you brands. Kind of goes back to that theme we were talking about of like, look, the world's already moving in this direction. Um, if you can have like a holding company that maybe isn't like a single brand that has multiple products in the portfolio, but it's literally like a holding company of different category brands. There's a few that are already doing this, like a Human Co., which was started by the old founder of Hue Chocolate. Forward Foods, which was I think is like a former Pattern Brands employee. But if you have the capacity to incubate as well as like purchase and acquire these better for you brands, I think there's a lot you can centralize on the back end. So much around like fulfillment, like general software, like like even its accounting, legal, so on and so forth. It's no different than doing this with like tech companies like Thrasio model. But you can build proprietary software that identifies emerging consumer trends. You could look at like SPINS data. You could acquire like Whole Foods, Erewhon data to look for low hanging, sleepy categories, like we mentioned. And you can like either incubate or purchase those brands outright and then start to improve gross margins across the entire portfolio. I think like the reason this is appealing is because my co-founder and I, having come from that mobile gaming industry, a mobile gaming company is really a holding company. You're basically trying to like rapidly test and like de-risk these individual games, and then you pump marketing dollars into growing them once they work. There is actually a company in China right now called Genki Forest. They are supposedly like the next Coca-Cola. The founder used to run this like super famous gaming company, and he sold it and he became a VC. And then he was like, wait a second, I see this opportunity in in food and bev. So he started this brand called Genki Forest. They sell like these low calorie, low sugar drinks. Some of them are like 0 calorie. They just use erythritol. And it is like the fastest growing food and beverage brand in China. Sequoia China, like Warburg Pincus, they're all investors. And he literally takes this like mobile gaming mindset of like de-risk, like fund, de-risk, iterate, experiment, use data, and then like use digital marketing to basically game all these products to the number one, like to the top of the list for all the like online Chinese shopping websites. I think on like China has this like special holiday called Singles Day. It's like the number one holiday of the year. And like he got Genki Force to be like the number 3 product out of all the products in China. Like it beat out like Coca-Cola, Pepsi. And so it's a very appealing model because it works, right? It's a kind of a proven, tried and true model. And I think this can definitely be done with better for you brands. And I'm sure that's why like Human Co. and all these holding companies now exist.
So what's the biggest barrier? And usually we just like riff for a few minutes on the idea and then we can wrap it. But what's the biggest barrier to starting that? Is it just having the capital initially to acquire the first brand? And if it's not capital, it's some sort of synergistic relationship where you can offer something to that first brand? Or what do you think is the biggest barrier?
It depends if you're incubating yourself or if you're straight out acquiring. I think for the acquisition, it's not so much the capital. I think capital is free flowing right now. To me, it's probably, yeah, it is identifying like the right category and then the right product within that category. You had asked a few questions around like, okay, well, what are the value props that appeal to customers? In the food and beverage world, it's like value props is definitely some of it. Branding is another important thing where, when I came from the tech industry, same as K-Chan, we didn't really think about branding. Like, sure, there were product marketers, but in CPG and consumer goods, it's so important. The positioning, like, your brand house, the way you have like an emotional roll up of the brand, like all this stuff does matter. And it's why, people like, there's a book called, I'm going on a tangent here. I think it's interesting though. Like, Start with Why is this book by Simon Sinek about like how every leader has to start with why. And he uses this example where if you ever talk to like an Apple fanboy or fangirl, they will always like, they love the products and they'll rave to you. Be like, oh my God, like the tech specs are amazing. The UI, UX is amazing. But really, like Apple products are not necessarily better than other brands. In fact, like sometimes they're even worse. And like somehow they've logically rationalized in their heads and they use like their neocortex to basically like that's like the data logic portion of the brain. And they're like, oh yeah, it's because of XYZ like tech specs. But really,
they reverse justify off the brand.
They reverse justify, but really it's the limbic system, which is like your feeling part of your brain that has already justified why you love a certain product. And like Apple's great at this because all their campaigns are like, think different. It's like, it's cool, right? It's like these silhouettes that are dancing with like AirPods and so you feel like you are a different person or you're like cool or you're unique or you're a creator by buying their products. And then you rationalize and over justify using other mechanisms. So all that stuff feeds into branding. And I think for consumer products, that is ultra important. Whereas for like tech, it's maybe doesn't matter that much. It's just like, does it work or not? So going back to that question is like, have people deconstructed what a good brand is? I don't think so. I don't know if it's like quantifiable in that regard just yet. So I think like holding companies have to consider, like Circle Up they were a CPG company that was trying to do this. They were a tech-enabled CPG company. Or sorry, not tech-enabled. They were a tech company that was trying to build proprietary software to analyze like CPG and understand which ones were breakout successes. I'm sure they looked at things like the nutrition label, the ingredient deck, consumer trends like velocity in store. But I'm sure at some point they probably had to also think about how to quantify branding. Like, why is it that Halo Top, when they did a rebrand, all of a sudden they like, and then you paired that with a little bit of PR, it like took off. There's something there, and we just don't know how to describe it really. So I would love to see a holding company that could kind of deconstruct this a little bit. We did this a little bit in the early days of Immi, where we could not decide, like, we have a label that showcases the value props, and we could not decide which ones should be at the top of the label. And we just created 3 designs and threw them up on Facebook, and we just tested the CTR. And whichever was like the best CTR, we're like, all right, the data speaks, let's do it. And that's how we literally launched. So like, there are probably ways you can de-risk this.
Yeah.
So
but that's sensing though. That sensing of the brand, that brand pop is very intangible. It's like hard to quantify.
Yeah, exactly.
One other thought though, why haven't people approached this? And I haven't thought this through enough, so there may be an easy hole to poke here, but instead of, one company with one product in one area starting and then looking to either partner or buy in a different space, what if there was like 10 or 12 people that started together as a collective and they said, hey, we're going to tackle these 5 trends at once and we're going to commit to rolling up from the beginning, building the back ends together, and then, hopefully they can get some of those trends correct, right? And you could just kill off the ones that don't work, but almost approaching it, I guess maybe the hole to poke is like, it's so hard to start one of those that starting 5 is almost impossible, right?
Well, I think that's the venture studio model, which has proven to work. Like Science and a couple of the other ones, Atomic. They've all raised successful funds. They've all incubated companies, and it is a similar approach of like, hey, let's give 5 founders capital with like 1 designer, 2 engineers, and let them build. Let's see what happens. And then the winners, like only a fractional win, and we'll double down on those ones. So I think it is definitely possible in food and beverage, especially if you have the right founder mix. I don't see why like a venture studio in food and beverage should not work. So I think that's what I forgot. Maybe Forward Foods might be doing that. I don't quite remember. One of these is doing something like this.
Yeah, it's fascinating though. When we were talking about the pizza rolls and all these niche categories, I was actually thinking, why doesn't someone just roll this up into, like you said, a holding co? So
yeah, Human Co, I think, is trying to do this, which I've been following them. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much for coming on. Before I let you go, I want to acknowledge you for a second. This has been a masterclass in so many different ways. I think your perspective in really the data-driven approach to brand building, taking that tech background and infusing it into a category that has some, but not a ton of tech influence, I think is really interesting. And if people take nothing else away than that, hopefully it was a great hour for them to spend and get educated. So I just want to thank you so much. I'm going to continue to be a massive fan of Immi, and I'm looking forward to V2 release.
Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
Kevin Lee, co-founder of Immi, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.